Have you given any thought to contributing to the melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth's merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander.
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt. We've started to invite guests on the Melt that are well versed in various forms of natural law, which is a system of justice held to be common to all humans that is derived from nature rather than the rules of society. As we've seen in the past couple of years, there has been an immense amount of coercion by the state and many institutions to bluff us into thinking that they have the right to tell us what we should put in our bodies for some contrived notion of the greater good. By pure bluff and fear-mongering, not to mention blatant divide-and-conquer tactics, they have tried to bully us into foregoing informed consent and submitting to an experimental quote-unquote treatment that hasn't been properly tested and has proven to not be effective in any tangible capacity. This is a direct violation of one's sacred physical and spiritual autonomy to have the ultimate say as to what breaches the boundary between the external and the internal, just as freedom of religion grants one the freedom to operate under principles which one holds sacred and which do not violate the freedom of another individual. Natural law recognizes that the living man and woman are divine creations and should have the ultimate say in their destinies without any interference from the worldly institutions of society, especially those who serve money and greed and who see and treat people as objects and items of commerce. Today's guest, Clint Griess, reached out to me on the recommendation of one of his students who had heard episode 93 with Natalie Sprague talking about the actions that she took to get her daughter out of having to wear a mask at her high school. I start off the conversation by asking Clint just what the law is.
There's so many different angles. The law obviously touches every aspect of life, and
Sure.
It's something that's ancient to humanity. So, yeah, the law is something that we use as a word, as a term. We use it very casually. You have to follow the law. People will say, but what does that really mean? And if you look into law, there's so many different kinds of laws, let alone laws of physics, or you may have heard of the law of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
These are said to be things that are immutable, unchangeable. But then in the human affairs, we have law of all kinds. If you look just in the world today, you have, for example, you have Sharia law, you have Talmudic law, you have commercial law, you have civil law, and you have common law. And it is distinct from the others. And it is, in fact, the newest of them all and the most powerful. So, there's another word that is very common nowadays. It's called the word progress, right? I'm a progressive, or we're progressing. Because there's an idea that as humanity, we're evolving and naturally and inevitably achieving higher and higher planes of existence through learning and experience. But when it comes to the American law experience, the political term progress or progressive is actually just the opposite. It's
Yes.
regressive.
Yes.
So you could almost say that if you look back when the heyday of common law, which was in America during the colonial times, was a unique and rare experience where the common law had matured enough in Europe, and then it was brought across the Atlantic, and then you have this colonial experiment that happened, where people got to try different forms of government without too much interference from the king, who at that time was very far away. So that really was the heyday of common law. And my challenge today is to somehow make common law the go-to law in the 21st century. And that's not an easy task.
Yeah, a noble pursuit, to be sure. So what actually brought you to study and practice common law, if you would call it practicing? I mean, you're not a lawyer, are you?
No, I'm not a lawyer.
Yes.
We can talk about lawyers.
Yes.
There's something called a common lawyer, common law lawyer. And but the lawyers that we know, the bar certified lawyers, those are actually the enemy of the people, we say.
Yes, exactly.
So I had heard of common law. We all have. It's actually in our school history books, high school history, American history, in between learning about the Revolutionary War and the battles and George Washington and all the things that we were supposed to remember for the next test. We did learn that the common law was the foundation and that we were indeed a free people. But I remember my personal experience at that age. It went in one ear and out the other. It didn't really matter to me. I didn't understand the distinction or the power of the assertion that I was free. And so we went along with the idea, the colloquial notion is, well, it's a free country, isn't it? And that's about the extent of it. And only recently did I understand the importance of it, basically because of the pandemic. I studied philosophy at Cal in the 80s, and I did take a philosophy of law class, in fact, in those days, thinking I might become a lawyer because it was one of the few professions that philosophy majors could likely go into. But at any rate, I do remember one thing that the professor said that really stuck with me. He said that the word rule comes from an old Greek word which literally referred to the pointer stick that you might see like a professor using to point to the chalkboard or what have you. This pointer stick is the thing that was once known as a rule. We have something called a ruler today, like a yardstick. But the idea given to me at that time was that rules are designed to point the way. And if you understand common law in a way, that is the very, very root of it. That laws, rules, statutes, regulations, codes, mandates, orders, all of these things in the common law understanding are there to point the way, to suggest a general direction. And that's it. Because the only person who is imbued with the power to determine the difference between right and wrong is yourself.
Right.
We are the creation of God, and God didn't just leave us empty-handed. He imparted to us a conscience. You can use a lot of different metaphors. People say it's in your heart, it's in your soul, but it is in you. This is one of the basic premises of common law or natural law, that we have this faculty within us. So when I was saying we want to restore the common law, we want to bring the common law into the 21st century, that is part of the task, is to remind people that this exists and to reteach them or teach them to relearn themselves how to access their conscience and to rely on it. That's a big task right there, because most of the materialistic world we live in, the atheistic materialistic paradigm says that we are mere objects, that we are just input and output, stimulus response machines, if you will. And so there isn't any conscience there. There's no proof of it. Consciousness, or a conscience by extension, would only be an illusion that is caused by some biochemical interactions in the brain or other parts of the spinal column. And so it's a really hard sell today. And not only that it exists, but that it's reliable. That is the thing upon which our society should rely to make important determinations about our behavior, our comportment with one another. So thanks for letting me say that, because it's really fundamental and seriously, it's something that is seriously under attack, if there's anything left at all. So you do find it in some religious, obviously, some believers, so to speak, still hold that, but even they have a pretty pretty bare version of what that really means. They think it's something that, is if you feel guilty, for example, because you've done something wrong. So anyway, I'd also like to talk about the infantile nature of Americans and how we really just do think of things like, are you a good boy or a bad boy? And at most nowadays, you're a good person if you follow the rules, and you're a bad person if you don't follow the rules. So if you remember what I was saying about a rule, something that is to indicate or to suggest a general positive direction, but ultimately you're the one to determine what is right and wrong, then it's really a horrible state of affairs if the base default paradigm of every American is that either you are a good person, you follow the rules, or you're a bad person if you don't follow the rules. So you don't have much choice. Those are your two choices. You can be a good person and follow the rules. You can be a bad person and don't follow the rules. And in fact, it really is an assault on our consciousness, because everyone facing the 61 million codes, rules, regulations, mandates that are on the books in this country, everyone knows that probably as you're sitting here right now, you're probably breaking one of those. So if you believe that they are the authority and your job is but to follow them, sooner or later, you're going to realize you can't. You want to be a good boy, you want to be a good girl, but you just can't. So some people will bend the rules and make enormous amounts of justifications, and then other people will say, screw it, I'm just going to be a bad boy. And then they develop an entire identity around that with the whole bad boy thing. And in fact, when you look at the courts now, I was talking about lawyers, bar-certified lawyers, you can see that our court system is nothing more than an exaggerated form of this.
Right. I have a quick question. I don't know, you mentioned you'd studied philosophy before when you were a student, and to my understanding, it was either Socrates or Plato who said, if man knows the good, he will do the good. And I believe it was Plato who said, well, man knows the good, but he does whatever he wants, and that's free will. So where do you find that free will falls in common law?
Okay, so yeah, common law is not just an individual game. That's the other obstacle we are facing today, is that people, without really knowing it, have a paradigm that the powers that be, I assert, have had us over several decades now. We're alienated, we're isolated, we're individuated, we're atomized. And so we look at the questions of good and evil, right and wrong, from this point of view. Yes, as I said earlier, you're the one to determine right or wrong, good or bad. However, we live in community. Common law is something that is a law for we the people. And so, for example, if you're in a jury, so this is an important part of common law, is that we believe that you should be judged by a jury of your peers. So you might feel that you're doing what's right, but in the end, you'll be judged by a jury of your peers. So we're not just relying on individuals to be the ultimate arbiter either. Yes, when you choose when you make your choice today for this thing, you'll be the one to choose freely based on your conscience. And hopefully you'll have a mature, wholesome character. That's one assumption that we have. Again, a big problem for the 21st century. Most people are debauched, is a word that some of our founding fathers warned us about. But then if there's a question, if there's a crime, this is what really matters. If there's a material consequence of your behavior and someone claims that your actions adversely harm them, then they claim the victim. You constitute a jury. The jury hears the facts, and the jury determines the rightness or wrongness and the consequences, if it's a punishment or some restitution or what have you.
So is that... I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Well, it's just a huge mind for people. It's so hard for people to get their heads around that, because today we think of juries and judges as being this almost rule-making, law-making venue where, if they say so, that's the way it is. They know the statutes better than I do, So I have to accept their judgment. And then what you get is jurisprudence, which is based on precedents that builds up almost like plaque over generations. And then when you go to a courtroom today, you basically have two lawyers citing various precedents saying, no, my precedence applies to the situation. No, my precedence applies to the situation. And the judge is going, well, let's look at the precedents. And then only rarely will a judge say, okay, we're going to make a ruling that departs from this precedent. But mostly jurisprudence today and law schools teach students that is what jurisprudence it is. But back in the day, each jury and its decision was standalone. It just handled that matter and it was done. Because people were interrelated in those days in a way that we are not today. They were interdependent. They recognized that my behavior affects your behavior, affects everyone's behavior, and everyone had a sense of, I'm going to say the word community, also a completely destroyed word, but a sense of unity, oneness, commonality that mattered. And so if somebody erred, if someone harms another person in your town, village, city, in your place, where you are there to sit as a jury, again, assuming that you're a wholesome person with the character and the upbringing necessary to take the responsibility, this important responsibility, then you will hear the facts and you make the judgment, and then that matters. It's finished. It's complete. The community is whole. And it doesn't have to create a precedent. It doesn't have to become something that another town in another place needs to even really care about. That's the nature of common law. It's natural. It's easy. It's common sense. It's not complicated. Does that help answer your question between free will and doing right?
It doesn't sound like common law and free will are consistent with each other, because it seems like if you are acting for yourself, that's more of a place of ego, which could be considered free will. But if you're acting in the context of common law, you're acting for the community. So you may kind of have to divorce yourself from your free will to do what's best for the whole, as opposed. So it's more of a collectivist mindset as opposed to an individualistic mindset.
That's right. It is, and that's something very foreign today to the typical American mind. It's not oppressive. It's a collectivism that's with an oligarchy on top, like from George Orwell's 1984.
Right.
Do you know the book by Emmanuel Goldstein that was absolutely prohibited? Was called the practices of oligarchical collectivism, which is what we have today all over the world. So you have an oligarchy at the top who has its own set of rules. And then the rest of us are left to be following those rules that they give us in a collective way. So we share the horrors of being together without the sovereignty that the commoners of an earlier day once had.
Mm-hmm. And I think sovereignty, if practiced properly and fully, it really takes a lot of self-awareness too. You can't really be a follower, a mindless follower, and claim to be sovereign at the same time. You have to know yourself. You have to know your light sides and your dark sides, and be willing to choose the right path that's going to not only serve you the best way, but serve the community and those around you the best way. And know that there's a line to be had between your free will and impinging on somebody else's free will. So I think that's why I think a lot of people have a hard time grappling with this too, because we're so used to farming out our autonomy to institutions, to governments, and letting them be our little mommies and daddies and taking care of us. And then we just kind of atrophy, our critical thinking skills atrophy, and we just forget that these people work for us. They're not the controllers of us. They're supposed to be doing our bidding. So that's a big mix-up that happens. Yeah. Yeah,
you put it very well, and what you're saying is horrific. If you really take the implications that you're describing, it could really be the explanation for all the horrors you see around us. But free will is not inconsistent with doing the right thing for you and your people. Exactly. So I'll say it this way: we are not a people. You've heard the expression "we the people," but there is no we and there is no people. So we are a collection of individuals today. And then we have these umpires called judges or police officers who come along and keep us in our lanes. And so that's why our moral development is so anemic in the way you're describing. It's a shame. And so, in fact, we have a course coming up that's simply called Restoration Character, Building Your Character, because of this recognition on my part that we need it. So another way of saying it is that if I had a magic wand and I could instantly bring common law into place right now, I would not do it. That would be ruinous, because we are in no condition to take that kind of responsibility. We're not far from the movie Idiocracy today. It's really bad. Yeah. So I'm not just talking about a small gap here, I'm talking about an enormous gap. So our training is going to be appealing to a small number of people who appreciate that, yes, there's something missing in their lives, that being an individual doing what they think is right in their life and hoping not to get in trouble, that's not going to be maybe our best candidate. But for the people who recognize that there's something missing in all of us and that my character needs to be developed. So I intend not to make it judgmental. I intend not to make it something like, I'm so much better than you. You need to learn how to develop your character and get with it. It's actually going to be an invitation for everyone to look into the mirror. I will provide some rules, in terms of general directions to look towards. But I'll start with the various, what I'm going to call inhibitors. It's a kind of a neutral term that I think is not too likely to cause people to be defensive. But if you just take an inventory of us. Just do an honest inventory of us. Okay, you can take out just a good percentage of people who are straight up criminals, who have malice in their hearts or larceny in their hearts. They exist. They're real. Some of them are in the highest positions in our land. But if you just take all of those people, that's a good percentage. You can make the estimate yourself, but it's a good chunk of people. But then for the ordinary person who's not a criminal, there's so many inhibitors. For example, all the addictions, drug addictions, addictions to sports and video games. You've heard it all, right? Porn. There are people who spend inordinate amounts of time with these things, and it cripples them. It cripples their ability to what does free will mean when you're an addict? It begs the question, what is free will at all if you are completely under the influence of a chemical addiction. And when I say chemical, I don't only mean substances. I mean, like, even porn is a chemical
Dopamine.
addiction. Dopamine and the chemicals that your brain generates, right?
Yeah.
I see it as all of those as addictions to immediate gratification. Is what it boils down to me. Yeah.
Thank you. Immediate gratification. And then you have all the debilitated people. So we have now lived at least 100 years under the umbrella, I'll say, of science and chemistry, modern living through chemistry. And so our environment is just loaded with chemicals that, have generational effects. I'm a health freedom advocate. I've been advocating for the end of fluoridation, coming out with a book later this summer, which will be a handbook for activists fighting water fluoridation.
Cool.
I hope maybe you'll want to learn more about that when the book comes out.
Sure. Yeah.
But the point is, there's fluoridation in our water. It's debilitating us. It's lowering our IQ probably in those people who drink it on a daily basis by 5 IQ points on average. That adds up, not to mention all the other assaults. So you've got to take that into account in terms of our character. If you're biologically fighting off these things, or if your genetics, to say in the womb, your genes are being altered, so you're born with any number of defects. What does that do to us as a people? You've got to add up all of these inhibitors, and then you have the oligarchy keeping us divided and fighting and pitting against us. Again, another dopamine response. Probably I want to investigate the biochemistry, the neurobiology in this urge to win, to beat the other guy. There's something so addictive about that as well. And as long as we're divided, we can't be a people.
Right. But a big percentage of this that you're talking about that kind of works in concert with fluoridation is people are nutritionally depleted. So how are you supposed to, really have any critical thinking skills if you can't formulate a thought at all because you're addicted to sugar, you're addicted to gluten, you're addicted to all of these foods, and then there's no exercise, there's no physical action and behavior on a daily basis that's giving you energy. So, of course, look at the obesity rates and how they have exploded in the past 30 years. I think, again, all of these things are by design. Every single one of these things works in concert with each other, and it's really a mechanism to enslave the population. That's the intent.
Well, thank you. Now I don't have to say it. You said it perfectly. And it's. I think we should all just take a breath and just take that in. It's not pretty what you're saying. It's an enormous obstacle for we the people. And it's by design. So those people who have taken the common law from us, I'll say it, I don't know if this has been said on your show before, but the common law once was the law of the land. And every teenager was proficient at the basic concepts of law. Of law, like legal terms, demurs, and what is it to do notice opportunity, what is due process. These things are not complicated, and the common law group exists to bring these basic concepts to people and make them accessible and available and relevant to their lives. But the hyper wealthy, there's so many different words for them. Now we call it the deep state, the cabal. On some of our classes, I invite the students to use their terms, and everyone has. It's interesting. The multi-generational, hyper wealthy criminal class. Just on and on and on. But these folks have never stopped. They existed before common law reigned, and they exist now. And so it's hard to pinpoint the exact date, but you can go, even the Constitution of the United States. Some people say that the Constitution of the United States, which is such a hollowed document, I don't treat it with idolatry. It is a document, it is a historical fact, and it is something not to to throw out with the bathwater. But it is, in fact, it does include some decisions that were made about how we govern ourselves. And for example, having a Senate with 2 folks per state. You may understand the reason for why they did that, because of states, the supremacy of the state. How we're a union of states, so of course the states needed to have that kind of power. But it wasn't long ago that the senators from every state were elected by the legislatures of those states. So now they're directly voted in by the people as a direct vote. So these
allegedly,
kind of decisions,
allegedly.
allegedly. So these kind of decisions, they do have consequences for how we're governed. But in the end, those powers have been eroding and working at every level, both the psychic level, the corporeal level in terms of poisoning us, all the various levels. But of course, through money, and the real dirty secret is how they've basically created a parallel government. Are you aware of this theory? It's hard to find. I haven't had my hand on concrete evidence of it,
Sure.
but like with every good theory, the theory that explains the observable phenomenon the best is the one you want to go with. So it looks like that they've created municipal corporations, including the United States Corporation, and that Washington, D.C. is in fact an entity that is outside of the original United States. And you're familiar with all this, right?
District of Columbia. Yeah, there's 4 city-states in the world. The Vatican, District of Columbia, London. Maybe there's only 3, or I'm missing one. Anyway, yes, I've heard of that before. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the actual territory of Washington, D.C., the federal government there is that little square between Maryland and Virginia. And then the territories or protectorates of Guam, Puerto Rico, Samoa. That's it. My state of California is sovereign, technically, but it's not the state of California anymore. So it's the Republic of California. It's the California Republic originally. But now it's the state of California, which is a brand, which is the municipal corporation that is the subsidiary of Washington, D.C. So they basically some people refer to it as a foreign invader on our land. So this is, again, another obstacle that challenges people's understanding of where they live and who rules over them. But the unfortunate part is that D.C. was also given the ability to print all the money. So it was very simple to destroy every republic, every sovereign land, just by bribing people.
Right.
Bribing the leaders, so to speak, the elected officials, but then bribing, Defense Department contractors. Farmers get subsidies. It's just they just buy their way through this land. So as children, if we were going to take that metaphor again, the nanny state, the daddy, telling us right or wrong, good or bad, they buy us ice cream too.
Sure.
Yep.
Absolutely. I call it the machine. That's how I see all of this, is that there's cogs in the machine.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, there's just so many ways to talk about it, and we have to pierce through people's, ordinary consciousness. If we can, break their trance with pop culture and whatever else that they might be entranced by, and try to get to them, that's the task in front of we the people.
So what would you say the basic tenets of common law were?
Well, common law, again, is rooted in the idea that we, the people, are sovereign. And it comes strictly from the fact that God created us. And God created us really good, created us really well. We are created in God's image. I know that's, again, one of the biggest crises today is in our own estimation of our fellows. When we look around and we say, oh my, sheesh, You want me to be one with that? That's the people that need to be sovereign. It's challenging. But yes, God did create us in his image. We have within us not just reason. You've mentioned reason a number of times, but common law goes deeper. And I'm a big fan of reason. Don't get me wrong. I believe reason can get you really far. But the conscience is actually another faculty that is supreme. And it is that gift that God imbued in us. Yes, he gave us rationality, he gave us emotions, he gave us will, he gave us all the things, creativity, humor. And but this conscience that I'm speaking about is the indicator of right and wrong. And so we are people who believe that we're good, that we can do that. So it's natural, it's common sense, it's easy, and it's simple. That's pretty foundational to common law. It's common law is actually almost the negation of all the other stuff, because what came before it and what it now basically runs the entire world is you can call simply civil law. So everything from the Soviets in Russia to the Nazis, to Imperial Japan, to Napoleon, like today in the dictatorships of Central America that we're familiar with, the United States machine, they're all run by civil law, which simply says that whatever is written is the law. However, in common law, it doesn't matter what's written. What matters is what is in your conscience. In your mind, you could say. It's in you. You don't need to look anywhere else. So it's fine to have rules written as long as the context you hold for them is that they are to provide general direction. Now, of course, also the other major fundamental caveat is that government is our servant. So the order of authority is God, and then his creation, you and me, and then we create government to serve us. So to invert that is to say the government is our master.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We've written these laws, and thou shalt follow these rules.
So could you call conscience another word for it? Could we call it intent or intention? Because it's really about what your intentions are that is what rules you. So if your intentions are to harm to someone else, then you are not living a conscious life. If your intent is to do no harm, then aren't you living in alignment with your conscience?
Indeed. There are four basic laws in common law, and one of them is don't harm anyone. And that should go without saying. And it's been an ancient law or rule forever. In fact, I say to people, do you really need a body called a legislature to craft a sentence or two or three or a million? Because to say to you, do not kill somebody, do you really need that to be written down for you to know that that's not okay? So we already know it's not okay. We already know it's not okay.
And the first person on that list should be yourself.
Well, thank you. It should be yourself. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, we live in a modern time. We're all kind of psychotic, to be honest. We have a distorted sense of reality. Who would harm oneself in the first place? Where does self-harm even originate? But yeah, it's pretty common nowadays. People are beating themselves up left and right. It's glorified.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost expected and romanticized.
So when I say it's your conscience, it actually comes, I think, even before your intention. It literally is at the very center of who you are. And the way I access it is by being quiet.
It's almost what informs your intentions, maybe.
It's what informs your intention. Your intentions form as a result of what your conscience speaks to you. I'm here to tell you, if no one's ever told you before, you can hear the voice for God if you're quiet. I have heard the voice for God. I didn't know it was possible. I tried it based on a couple of suggestions, one from a book called The Cloud of Unknowing by an unknown monk from the Middle Ages in Europe. And he simply said, yes, God is completely unknowable, but you should sit down in quiet and look into the unknown and stare into that cloud of unknowing and just do that for a period of time.
Bask in it.
You're not basking in it. You're not going to, don't think you're going to actually know God, absolutely, at the end of the day, but the very activity of pointing toward God and just being available. Sometimes I see it as a metaphor where I'm standing outside a door and I knock on the door and then I just sit and I wait for someone to come to the door. And it works. It works. I heard the one time that changed my entire life, God said to me, Clint, and it was not audible, just so you know, it wasn't like an auditory thing. Mm-hmm. It just came, it was downloaded one big packet. And it came to me and it said, Clint, don't worry about finding clients or getting, business. This was I was disturbed about how do I get clients. For 20 years before I was in politics and the law, I was a coach and trainer for primarily startups in Silicon Valley, CEOs and their small startup teams. And he said, Clint, don't worry about getting clients. I will make sure that you are brought into contact with the people you need to be brought into contact with. And when it happens, you'll know it. For all the other times, maintain your fitness for those occasions, and then otherwise enjoy the pleasures of life. I'm done. That's it. What more is there?
Yeah, exactly.
So right now, I believe that you and I were brought into contact for a reason. I don't need to know the reason. I just need to be here. I just need to be fully present with you right now. And it'll be revealed. It'll be clear what was meant, why this had to happen, what I need to learn, what you need to learn, what I need to teach, what you need to teach. It's also a principle from a wonderful book called The Course in Miracles. Mm-hmm. If you've ever heard of it, I recommend it highly.
Yeah, you have it on the bookshelf, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completed A Course in Miracles about 9 or 10 years ago. And once that was done, I was done. There's no more working on myself, no more striving, no more wondering, no more worrying. It promises true perception, and that's exactly what I got. So my entire life now is dedicated to the service of everyone else. Period. Full stop. And common law is the thing that I've determined is so fundamental and so elemental, and it's available. That's the other thing. It just needs to be dusted off a bit and brought back into fashion. And wow. So I really predict that we're heading predictably. The predictable future is lockdown, tyranny, one world government, digital currency, the whole 9 yards. The whole dystopic future that they don't mind projecting in our mind's eye, so our imaginations actually contribute to its manifestation. That's the direction we all seem to be heading. But it's not absolutely inevitable.
Absolutely.
So therefore, sooner or later, whether it's from the agony of the chains, the slavery, or some pain point will become bad enough. I've already passed that point myself a long time ago. But for others who get shaken out of their comfort and their trance and say maybe there's something wrong here, they're going to really want freedom, but not as a concept, not as this abstract concept that people toy with the word. They will want something that's not tyranny, that's not slavery, and that will be very much a desire for freedom. But then they'll look around and say, how do we possibly live free What is that like? It's so foreign. How can we, all of us as a people? And then someone will say, didn't those Americans figure that out like a few hundred years ago? Wasn't there like a thing? Let's try that. And it'll be there, ready when people are ready to take it on.
I think what's been so interesting about the past 2 years, and I even heard Bill Gates comment on this, is they were surprised at how compliant people were. And I think that there will be a segment of the population that, as much freedom as they can be afforded, they will deny that in themselves and don't want it, maybe because they don't trust themselves and they want to be led. So I think that's kind of an interesting dichotomy, is that a lot of what you're saying so far is not only is it common law, but it should be common knowledge, and it should be something that innately we all know that we have the right to. But I just see people so willing to give away their freedom, and I think we've got to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like we're not going to wake everybody up. I think there's going to be a certain segment of the population that goes along with the program, and God bless them. That's how I look at it.
Well, like you were saying earlier, Clint, if you had the power to instill common law, like with the snap of your fingers, you wouldn't, because everybody's not there yet. But that's all right, because sovereignty doesn't have to be on a mass scale. It really can only happen truly one person at a time. You can't instill sovereignty. The people have to embody it themselves. That's where the consciousness comes in. So I think it's okay. It's okay that we're doing it one person at a time, and that some of us are gathering together and trading recipes and hacks and shortcuts and knowledge, because I feel like I'm just newly learning this stuff, learning something that I feel like I know already, but you hear it differently when it comes from an outside source. So thanks for providing that and making us feel a little less lonely in that pursuit. But mass sovereignty, not a good thing. Let's do it one at a time. And I think that's the way we can help to spread it to other people, is by embodying it, by example.
Absolutely. So practically speaking, another artifact from the olden days, something called a committee of safety. So we at the Common Law Group for the rest of the year are going to be training people from county to county to create a county committee of safety. Have you heard of a county committee of safety or a county committee of restoration?
No.
So it turns out that, the Declaration of Independence and all the famous founding documents that we're familiar with, the constitutions of the various states, they were all created by people who were represented by their county committees of safety. So when we talk about we the people, this is what it means in absolute practical terms. The people constitute themselves. It's like the ultimate grassroots. But again, it's not for activism to try to change the system and try to make daddy, give you a toy. It's about really being the people that you are. And so it starts somewhere with a cell, if you will. And they're called committees of safety. And interesting, right? Because safety is what the oligarchs always use to tell us why we have to do this and that.
For your safety.
Yes, for your safety. So this is the real safety, the safety to protect us from incursions into our sovereignty. And so, these are people at that time of great character, typically men of means, who had achieved a degree of success so that they had ample time and energy to give this amazing service to their counties. And so there are some 3,000 plus counties in the United States, and we intend to eventually have a county committee of safety in every single one of them. So it's a multifaceted training, because there's the nuts and bolts of it, which means how to constitute a committee, what's the leadership like, what are the rules for decision making. There's subcommittees. So there's a general steering committee, and then there's all the various committees that your heart may desire, from food sovereignty to transportation to whatever your county and your people feel is needed, and including correspondence committee, which then speaks between all the subcommittees and with committees from other counties. So this is the network. This is the organic network that made our country originally. And so we are dusting that off and bringing it to people. And again, it's going to be a multifaceted training because there's the nuts and bolts of it, but then you also need two other elements, which are the character element I was describing earlier. People are going to have to do some serious look in the mirror and ask themselves, what are they willing to let go of or transform in their lives to be able to be a person capable of fulfilling a county committee role. And then we also need to have an entire element about restoring the knowledge of what it is to be a we in the first place. People are culturally illiterate. So from my training and education as a coach that I've done for 20 years in small teams was to teach teams how to be durable and highly impactful by first understanding who they are, even before you begin strategizing, just to understand that who you are is your purpose and that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And this is, again, a problem today. It's no surprise that we're culturally illiterate. When we come together in organizations, you've seen it, like you said, you're talking about lots of people are sprouting up all over the places, these freedom cells, and there's health freedom movements. And I have personally coached a number of organizations in the Bay Area in order to just give them this cultural literacy to know how to be together in the first place, based on what is your noble cause, what is your purpose, and that you invent it, you choose it, and it comes into existence because you choose it. So we the people aren't just an accident. What is it to be a people? What is it to be the people? These are questions that people don't ask, they don't think about. So the training clearly has to help people get out of their own way, again, stop being the individualistic, self-seeking person that we're so trained to be, and learn to perceive the we, which is something that is a whole greater than the sum of its parts. It's really challenging to get across because we are so inculcated to think of ourselves as but a collection of individuals. And we are not just a collection of individuals. You have to create a whole we. So the county committee says we, the people, the inhabitants of this county. That's who we are. We are the sovereigns. We are the sovereigns. And our purpose is to govern, self-govern. So it's going to be multifaceted training. It has to go at all three of these dimensions, which arise simultaneously, but because each has their own considerations, it will be 3 parts to the training. Very excited about it. We're going to bring experts in the various areas to help out. Because again, there's this explosion, and I'm meeting new people every day. Like you said, hearing it in a different way. Just last weekend was the Private Society Solutions Symposium, which is really another topic altogether within common law. Many people want to create these committees of safety to organically rebirth the republic from the ground up. Other people just want to skedaddle. They just want to say, you guys go do your thing. We're going to create private associations, whether that means moving to some land somewhere and setting up a conscious community where they all share a certain set of values and they work in a certain way. Or if you stay within your geographical area, but then have networks with people and you have your private membership association amongst yourselves, whether that means for schooling, for medical care, for financials, for land purchases, all the things that people might want to do. And that's one of the other of the 4 major laws within common law is honor your contracts. And in the Constitution, we have the Bill of Rights, the first of which stipulates that we have a right to freedom of assembly. And a lot of people think that simply means that you have the freedom to go out with your picket sign and yell in front of the Capitol. But no, freedom of assembly means you're free to make contracts and associations with others without the government intruding. You don't have to have a state-sanctioned corporation. You can have a private association where the government does not get in your place. So, it's very fascinating because the idea of contracts is so fascinating because that's exactly how the machinery works. That's how the machinery has perpetrated its fraud upon us and incrementally snuck away the common law because they've gotten us to sign contracts in exchange for our rights. So we've exchanged our rights for privileges, right? So everything from Social Security, driver's license, even the birth certificate. You're familiar with this conversation, right? So in one way, the powers that believe that they are acting lawfully because, look, whether through acquiescence and silent consent or just I got their signature on this application, they didn't read the fine print, that's their problem. They believe that they have our consent. And it's arguable to say that maybe they do. Although I will teach people when they do wake up and they do learn that this fraud has been perpetrated, there is also a principle of contract law that both parties need to have they'd be fully informed.
Yes, exactly.
So you're fully within your rights. It's perfectly ethical. Your conscience will not complain if you say, "Hey, this contract is not valid because I was not at all aware of what this meant in terms of signing away my rights."
And that's where the jab comes in because they did not want to give people informed consent. Mm-hmm. So basically, they were implying that in order to be a decent person, you had to go and get this shot, but they weren't willing to do double-blind studies and then release the data from those studies. So it's kind of like you are being coerced into signing on to a contract that actually infringes on your medical sovereignty and your medical freedom.
Absolutely. And that's how they get us every which way. On our website, we have a course called Freedom to Travel. So it's a whole sub-segment of people who want to dedicate themselves to the freedom to travel. We have the right to go wherever we want, whenever we want, including in your automobile on the public highways. You've heard about this before. So, in the course, we reveal the fraud that is the vehicle code and the DMV and the licensing and the registration fees. But even the tax on gasoline, which everyone's talking about the price of gas, there's a huge portion of that is tax. So that's actually a classic tale that is uniform almost across the board in terms of how they perpetrate the fraud. It always begins with a governmental agency. So the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, for example, in California, I'm sure in every state as well, began when the state bought its first cars. And they needed to have a Department of Motor Vehicles to manage their automobile fleet, their assets, and they need to have rules and regulations about how to register them, and then to make sure that people who are going to be driving them, government employees, were qualified. And that was just a great way to be accountable and responsible as a government, for the job that the people want them to do. It's a great thing, right? But then at some point they say, look at all these accidents on the highway. They just start saying, you now have to comply with all of these rules and regulations. And because of the various factors we've been speaking about, people just go along and say, oh, now, and it just becomes enculturated. And now you just have to do these things. But technically, the vehicle code only applies to those people who are in a regulated industry or are government employees. Yeah. And the regulated industries are those drivers on the highway in vehicles that are for hire,
right?
Whether goods or people. So you and me, if you're just going to visit grandma, we don't need a license. We don't need to register our cars. But try to tell that to a patrol officer who pulls you over. Technically, they should ask you first, excuse me, are you using this conveyance today for business, for hire, or are you just traveling freely as a free American? And if you're traveling as a free American, they're like, have a nice day.
But coercion,
And that's the way it should
coercion is not consent. And that's where where it gets muddy, because people feel like, well, I should just go ahead and register my vehicle because I don't want to deal with the cops. So they're being coerced into compliance.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they set the fee at an amount that they know, or they've figured out, people won't complain too much about.
Right.
Like you said, it's easier to pay it.
Right.
You know, if they were, this is the way I put it, if they truly felt that going over the speed limit was the risk to our health and our lives the way they say it is, then why not just make the fee $1 million?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Then no one would speed ever. But instead, we know that it's just a money-making scheme. And so this is why I'll also continue to say that what I'm doing is hazardous. They don't want us to know the truth. So coercion in the form of intimidation, these are the two prongs they always use, intimidation and our ignorance. So, you know, we're ignorant. We think we have to pay these things. Someone pulls you, oh, sorry, officer, I didn't see the sign.
Right, and they have to give you a ticket if you say that. If you admit guilt, an admission of guilt means that they have to issue you a citation. So if you get stopped for speeding and you say, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I was driving so fast, I was going to the store, then the officer by law has to give you a ticket because you've admitted guilt.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So never say, I was speeding. Say, what can I help you with? How are you doing?
Exactly. Yeah, we dedicated an entire class in the Free Traveler movement course called "Don't Fear the DMV," and the whole class is dedicated to what should you do when you get pulled over, because it's a critical moment. You can really. We've got stories. We've got video from our main presenter of how he's been successful at touching the conscience. I know it's hard to believe. Getting to the conscience of these people at your window. It doesn't always work, but it's worth a try. And it's fascinating, the interpersonal dynamics right then and there, the power dynamics, the back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they're not automatons. These are humans. And you can penetrate the soul of another human being if you see them as a human and you don't see them as an authority and a threat.
Well, folks, that seems as good a place as any to end the first free hour. To hear the second hour and Hunter and I's commentary, just go to patreon.com/themeltpodcast, where for as little as $3 a month, you can get full episodes, exclusive episodes, and early episodes, and also have access to monthly Melt meetups, which we then record and turn into Patreon-only episodes. They're quite therapeutic. Never undervalue the nourishment that one can get from speaking with open-minded people. In the second hour, we cover traveling while sovereign, notices of violation, getting out of vax mandates, acts of civil disobedience, and much, much more. It's a great conversation, very informative, and I can't wait to talk to Clint again. All right, there's very, very wonderful things coming down the turnpike, lots of great interviews coming up, and please stay tuned for more, and take care, people.
If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to The Melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make the melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word to friends and family via social media, email, or word of mouth. And lastly, if none of those options are readily available or appealing to you, simply send your positive thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.